Okay, good evening, everyone. This is the March 25th, 2024 Town Board, Lewisboro Town Board work session, where we're going to review the comprehensive plan, specifically the zoning code, proposed zoning code sections and the edits. For those in the room, there's an exit towards the front of the building and there's an exit to the rear. And if you will, please join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So it's just maybe at the outset to mention so the public knows we got the upcoming public hearing and opportunity for everybody to comment, right?
Yeah, we can.
Yeah.
Do that, sure. I just have one piece of communication I'd like to share with everyone, and this is from Standard & Poor's Global. So we had on March 13th, we had a couple of weeks ago, we actually had an interview, a ratings call with Standard & Poor's, and on March 13th, they came back to us and upgraded the town's long-term general obligation credit rating from AA to AA plus with a stable outlook, and they applied similar rating to the bonds that we are in the process of issuing. So congratulations to everyone who contributed. I have to give credit to all the town employees for their being frugal when it comes to expenses, and also, of course, the prior town supervisor. This didn't happen overnight. There was a lot of work that went into this, and I have to congratulate Peter Parsons for all the work that he did, together with our former controller, Leo Masterson, and our current controller, Nisha Singh, who worked closely with Standard & Poor's in providing all the information they needed. So kudos to all. And this helped with the low interest rating that we received, below 3.2% with our latest bond issue. Okay, next we'll jump right to the work session, which is to discuss the comprehensive plan update and review of the proposed zoning code revisions. I'm going to turn it over to Valerie Manastro of Nelson Pope and Borders.
All right, great. Thank you so much. So I just want to give like a little bit of background on why we're here tonight. Also, Justin is here he represents the planning board, he's planning board attorney, and he's also working with us on the development or finalizing the zoning. So let me just give a little background as to where we are in the process. So first, with any comprehensive plan process, we did an inventory analysis, which basically provides a snapshot of your existing conditions within the town of Lewisboro. And then from there, we started doing public outreach, getting feedback in terms of what strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and then compared that with your inventory analysis. And then we developed goals and objectives and a vision statement associated with to develop the comprehensive plan. That also went out to the public, and we got feedback from the public on the goals and objectives, as well as the vision statement. And then from there, we developed the comprehensive plan itself. In the comprehensive plan, some of the goals and objectives, as well as some of the statements backing those goals and objectives, identified certain zoning, and I'm saying zoning, but it's really more town code amendments that could help support and implement the goals and objectives of the comprehensive plan. And so we're here tonight to kind of walk through those potential town code amendments. Specifically, now that, the comprehensive plan steering committee recommended the comprehensive plan as well as the proposed town code amendments to this board, it is ultimately the board's final decision to adopt the comprehensive plan and then also the zoning itself. And Judson will kind of walk the board through at the end, like the rest of the process, the approval process. And he'll talk a little bit about the secret process we need to go through and what's also required in terms of adoption and the public hearings. The other thing about tonight, I thought it'd probably be good, I know, and the public might not be fully aware, but this board has been viewing the various drafts in different iterations throughout the process. Two of the town board members have been intimately involved with the comprehensive plan steering committee and the zoning subcommittee. So what I thought tonight was we have, and all of this information has been posted onto the town website, the comprehensive plan website. And I thought it would be probably good, we can kind of walk through the PDF that sort of summarizes each one of the proposed zoning or town code changes. And I'll do a quick, very, very quick brief summary of like just what was changed or what is proposed to be changed. And then I'll open it up to the town board and see if you have any specific questions on that particular section of, you know, either a particular chapter or the zoning. And then we can dive in a little bit deeper if you have any particular questions. I also understand if for some reason you don't, I know you've reviewed it a number of times. And so what we're really here tonight is just a workshop and work session to just answer any questions you have and then dive into some details. Does that work for everybody?
Sure. What I'm gonna do about it, if you don't mind, is I'm gonna
Sure.
share that PDF document
Okay.
with, this way it's here and folks at home can also see it. Just log into the Zoom.
Just while you're doing it, as just as an overview, maybe to incorporate just the wide angle lens. So what are the financial reasons, financial repercussions as to why we need to adopt this?
Sure.
And legally also, and also when we need to adopt it or not adopt it. In other words, is there any time restraints on it as to when we have to do this within a certain time frame? Does it have any repercussions, that kind of thing?
So I'll answer the planning aspects, and I'll turn it over to Chelsea. All right, so from the planning perspective, so technically, just a little bit of legal, New York State town law does require all decisions made by town boards, town, you know, agencies, as well as, you know, new development that comes into the town to be consistent with your comprehensive plan. And so your comprehensive plan was last updated in the 1980s. And so since that time, there has been a lot of change within the town of Lewisboro. And so really, it's very important to reflect the updates of what has basically occurred in the town of Lewisboro and where the town of Lewisboro really wants to go in terms of future growth and future development. And when I say growth, it really is just growth as a whole in terms of, you know, your programs, your policies, and then as well as development and future commercial uses or residential uses, et cetera. And there's also been changes in terms of technologies as well as other regional issues that didn't exist back in the 1980s. So a lot of it is also modernizing and bringing things up to standards. And in terms of having comprehensive plans and frameworks, it does enable the town to better position themselves for grant funding, because a lot of times grants want to see how what you're proposing is supported by your comprehensive plan or some sort of planning framework document. And so that's very helpful as well. And then also the comprehensive plan will refer to other documents that you've developed. And that will also, and specifically dealing with, for example, like some of your engineering documents, dealing with like the water quality in some of your lakes, as well as some of the cell tower issues that you've had in terms of cellular service. And so all those different other documents help provide additional backing towards getting additional funding and grants. And then turn over to you about the.
Yeah, so one thing I want to underscore at the outset is with the comp plan, you're not adopting a comp plan out of whole cloth. This is an update to the comp plan. And I say that because from the perspective of environmental review and secret processing, that makes a difference. If this were an initial out of the box adoption of a comp plan, you would be a type 1 action and really have to run the entire secret gauntlet. And I'm not saying that this board is in any way trying to shortchange environmental review, but as an update, it is an unlisted action and it would allow the board more flexibility from a kind of a processing and secret timeframe. With regard to timing and Rich's question, no, we're not under an immediate, you know, done or an immediate timeline to do so. Obviously, it needs updating. I think the process thus far, I you know, and I'm not trying to, you know, commend everyone and, you know, say we're all great, but no, it's been very transparent. A lot of time's been spent on it. And I think moving forward in terms of timelines, the consideration that you really want to keep in mind is once it's ready and once it's ready to go, that we observe all of the requirements in terms of public hearings, which there will have to be public hearings conducted, referrals, and the focus on timelines, I guess, in response to Richard's question is once the comp plan is in what we'll call final form, once the zoning amendments are in quote unquote final form, how do we process that so we don't run afoul of any procedural hiccups or any mistakes in that regard? And we can talk about those timelines when we're those stuff.
Thanks.
Next question. So should we begin?
Yes, and I have the documents up on the screen.
Let's start with the very first one, which is the Architectural and Committee Review, Appearance Review Council. So there were some amendments we're proposing for that particular chapter, which is separate from years over. And that specifically focuses on the types of applications in which its acronym is ACARC, has the jurisdiction to review. And this really focuses on adding in specifically dealing with historic districts and historic buildings and historic sites, and adding that into their purview for review. Right now, technically, anything under the special character overlay district also requires ACARC review, as well as commercial or business and signs. But one of the things that we noticed was missing from this, and was something that we heard from the public, was that concern that, trying to preserve historic preservation as much as possible. And this is one way of doing so when there's new developments on those particular properties that have those types of structures, that they would require additional architectural review.
I don't remember, is there anything in the inventory that kind of earmarks or identifies potential properties in the inventory?
There in the inventory, there's a large list of all your historic districts, as well as properties that are eligible and properties that are listed. And so those right now, you actually do have historic districts, but there's no review for anything that takes place in those historic districts beyond like your normal typical planning board. And so we were suggesting that at least for the first step is to have the ACARC review those types of changes.
There's a reference to being listed on a local inventory of historic places.
Yes.
Is that a specific thing or is it anticipatory?
So it's a little bit of both. So technically you have voluntary, it's a voluntary program for people to list their own individual homes if they'd like to, as historic. That doesn't necessarily mean that they have to go have a park review, but it's something that if the town decided wanted to take that next step, they could call that initial list as a local inventory, or you could create your own local inventory. So it's there as an option for the town if you wanted to expand.
So it's being an option, is that clear from this? It's kind of.
Well, unless you
Specifically.
pass a resolution specifically stating that it's local, you don't have anything that's local.
So in other words, the board would have to identify this inventory. That's okay. That's not 100% clear to me here. So.
Well, I mean, that's just that's your typical legal process. I don't, that's why I think you have to enumerate that in what's technically reviewed for.
Yeah, just reading a local inventory, so that's.
Is this?
Online. Yes,
It is.
sorry to
Okay, so-
interrupt. It's online here. When you look at it online,
Oh, I have
and
that.
if you open up the document in the email, you can actually click on the section and then it shows up like this. So you can see that they've redlined it and you can see everything that they've taken out and everything that they've added.
Okay.
Are you, Greg's asking?
Yeah.
Do you want me to send you the
Yeah,
link?
go ahead. I was on the
Yeah,
side.
yeah.
Like on the side. Sorry.
Oops.
This is my favorite part of this posting.
I mean, we can take a look at that and maybe just add something that says individually listed on a local inventory of historic
Yeah,
places by the town of Lewisboro, established by the town board, at section 9 or something.
Maybe
like that.
that.
Should not to put you on the spot, I know like in Tuckahoe, they have a historic preservation law that they, for example, is there anything above 287 in any municipality that you're aware of, towns or villages that have enacted it? Yeah.
Town of Bedford is definitely one. Uh, Town of Newcastle, possibly, I think Newcastle has it, Bedford definitely does.
Historic
Because
preservation
it's
law,
been-
in effect.
Yeah, because it's been the subject of litigation, it's been, I think other communities, possibly North Castle, also north, but Bedford definitely. Yeah, yeah.
We did not, right now, did not put together an historic preservation law. I think that was the decision of the zoning committee that to maybe do first steps, and then if the town board wants to consider moving to historic preservation law, you could. It is identified in the comprehensive plan as an objective at some point in time in the future, but it's not something that is part of the zoning.
So that could be an amendment in the future.
Yes.
That would be in this plan, yeah.
And keep in mind the comp plan is sort of the guiding document, the foundation, so whatever is in the comp plan does not need to be given immediate, force and effect in your code. But it's there if the town board decides to move in that direction.
Right,
Yeah.
It's
okay.
not a 6-month punch list.
Yeah.
No, it's not, right, yeah.
And so for a number of these things, like historic preservation, we thought taking that first step would be the best for the town, and then if you want to continue moving forward. you can.
And I would say that, if you want to move in the direction of historic preservation, that is not a 6-month item. I mean, that's something that requires
Yes.
a lot of thought.
Time and thought.
Yeah, right.
Given the Bedford experience, it sounds like you need to be careful.
You need, yeah,
Okay,
and they've, what they have and what they've implemented, it's working, but it's. And you need, I think you need to be very careful, and you need real kind of community appreciation and buy-in.
Any other questions on that one? So the second really focuses on chapter 191, streets and sidewalks. This was another, it's really focused on Article 3 maintenance. This focuses on sidewalk maintenance and repair. One of the things throughout the comprehensive plan specifically was identifying, trying to bring in some additional sidewalks within either potentially site plan developments or within just the community in general. And so one of the questions that came up through the zoning subcommittee was how will these effectively be maintained, right? There needs to be some sort of language within the town code for that. And so that's really what this section focuses on.
And it's typical language with many municipalities, or in terms of the maintenance of the sidewalks, and it's.
Yes.
It's typically the owner,
Adjacent property owners.
yeah,
usually.
the adjacent
exactly.
property owner.
I mean, in a big scale, like in the city used to be, the city used to have responsibility for city sidewalks, and then over 20 years ago, they put it on the adjacent property owner
Right.
as far as obligations, but
and then there's other places that have gone to like sidewalk districts and use different formulas to distribute those costs. I don't think we're ready for that at this point, but maybe some day in the future we'll come back to this, but we need something.
I think this is more for thinking, and you have really not many sidewalks to speak of, but the plan or the thought is that community wants to move in the direction of having pathways, and
Yeah.
this would apply
Folks supports it.
to those things that may come in the future.
A good start.
Any questions on that? So the next is chapter 217, wetlands and water courses. So this specifically, so the impetus behind this, one of the things that came out through the comprehensive plan process was to look at the environmental codes within the town of Lewisboro, to review those, clarify and strengthen. And I think with wetlands and watercourses, a lot of it really focused on clarifying here. There was some edits done to the wetlands and watercourses a few years ago. And but it also included some more substantive changes. And I think the town board decided to just place a hold on that at some point. And so what we took a look at the current zoning, the current wetlands and watercourse regulations, as well as what was proposed back then. And there was a lot of really good edits that were made by your wetland consultant back then. And also, I think it was like maybe one of your environmental advisory committees as well. But really the focus was that a lot of the existing regulations that you have right now don't really reflect your process that's taking place. And so all this really brings in more or less your overall process that's actually taking place during wetlands for wetland permits, which we think will actually help clear up some confusion sometimes that applicants, find when they're coming to the board, because they're reading one set of regulations and the process is slightly different. It clearly puts an administrative process in there for your wetlands consultant. And then it also modernizes to a larger extent some of the definitions within the wetlands and watercourse regulations. So that's really, for the most part, what the purpose of the amendments were for this particular change.
I think that's a title there, watercourse chapter 271. Was that-
Yes.
It should be there.
Was there any input as far as any adjustment of the 150-foot buffer along the process?
Yeah.
I think the principle was there was so much to do in terms of just basic cleanup and consistency work and everything that we didn't want to go into fundamental areas that were going to carry us into, very difficult discussions for weeks and different stakeholders and everything. We could certainly come back again to these, but I think that was anyway the approach.
Nothing that substantial was changed,
Correct.
and I would have been an
No,
advocate for
just-
shrinking that down, so
Yeah, just
we probably
curious if
would have
there's-
heard me going on and on.
Yeah, just curious if that came up in discussions, not even.
No,
Okay.
this is more of a cleanup, neatening up, making it a little
Well,
more
that's a good
clear.
point. I mean, has it come up, I wonder, with any of the workshops with folks?
It did not come up, the buffer itself did not come up.
Yeah.
There was definitely, I would say amongst the community, there was concern about protecting the wetlands, but then we also heard concern from people that had to go through the wetlands permitting process and found it very arduous. And so we hope that maybe clarifying some of this would make it a little bit easier.
I think there's a few instances where houses were built, and when they were built, they weren't in the wetlands, but then the buffer changed and now their homes are actually in the wetlands after the fact. So it's a whole, whole different thing. So they're automatically, no matter what they do, they've got to go through the
And
process.
not to mention the wetlands itself changing.
Yes.
Its boundaries as well.
What is it? But
Those are defined areas, the way it is.
Well,
Yeah.
they are, but wetlands can change.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's
Correct, someone needs to go back and define the
Yeah,
wetland
back
boundaries.
and map and.
Yeah.
Yeah, and define.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we find. But one of the things we're trying to ease is to. Make it clearer when. You hit a threshold, something can be dealt with administratively. As opposed to running the gauntlet of the planning board, and just trying to like. Val was trying to kind of ease out and clarify some of those so that when you come in. It's just a more clearly defined path for someone who is doing something modest.
Right.
because in my experience in the planning board, so I know that when people came in, a lot of times when there's a potential violation, a lot of times, oh, I had no idea. I had no
Oh, right,
idea.
right.
I had no idea about the regulations. I had no idea that I was violating it. And that's the first knowledge of what the wetlands are in town is that they violated it. They got notification of it.
Not the best first step.
Sounds like an opportunity for some education work that happens.
I think the Conservation Advisory Council is planning on that at the library soon.
Oh, cool.
And I mean, quite candidly, a lot of Lewisboro is wet. I mean, it's just.
Especially after Saturday.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Any other questions on that one? So the next is the excavation and fill. So this was something that, specifically, we developed a new chapter. We just have to, it's right now it just says XX, so we're gonna finalize Justin's gonna provide us numbers and drop those in. But basically what it was clear that, throughout the process that the town really doesn't have any excavation or fill provisions or really regulations. And so it was recommended that, the town consider adopting a new chapter, which really focuses on excavation and fill. And so we developed new regulations, so it's an entirely new chapter, which require an application specifically before the planning board or and let me just give you exactly what. So if a permit from the planning board would be required for any operation in this chapter regarding removal, stripping, disturbance of topsoil, earth, sand, gravel, or rock greater than 15 cubic yards in quantity. And then of course, so that's where really what it's focusing on is that size.
I had a question on that. Where did that 15 cubic yards come from?
So that was quite a lengthy discussion at the zoning subcommittee, and it was recommendation from both from numerous people on that zoning subcommittee based upon what they know that typically takes place in people's properties, as well as ultimately what they felt comfortable enough in terms of not needing review versus needing review, depending on the quantity. And so 15 cubic yards became that.
Which was an increase from what the initial draft had.
Yeah.
I forget what's in there.
The initial draft had like 5 cubic yards.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, that was.
Jan
That would have
Right.
put it on over to.
Jan came in and sort of put that in perspective for us in different scenarios and so I think the number is good now.
Are there any neighboring municipalities that have a chapter like this that's been in effect and working well?
Almost.
Most,
Yeah.
Harrison has one.
Almost all.
because you have people that, quietly bring in fill and try to regrade their property or even things out to put a shed or, do things and, it unfortunately many times affects how the water flows through the property and then affects adjacent property owners or water courses and things that didn't flood before are now flooding or.
Or you end up filling a wetland.
Yeah.
You're not expecting right in Lewisboro. So, yes.
And this does regulate the type of fill that can be brought in as well, right? It's gotta be clean fill
Yes, that's correct.
and they have to provide certain proof of where the fill came from and.
Excellent.
And then, of course, as with any new law that you're adopting, you'll see how it works for the town, and if it needs to be tweaked, you can always tweak it, you have the structure here, if you need to put an administrative process in, you can do that. If you need to also, tweak what gets reviewed, you can do that as well.
And who would have jurisdiction over that enforcement?
It's the planning board for
Planning.
anything over 15 cubic. Right?
Right, and the building inspector. So the building inspector would easily be able to also communicate with the town board if they found that,
Right.
there was some issues with like the excavation bill permit, or you wanted to create a slightly different process.
Many times the complaints come in as, I saw these trucks going by and they went onto my neighbor's property. I don't know what they were filled with and. Then the building inspector will go out and see what's going on and then it will end up with the planning board. Depending, I mean, some building departments handle it themselves and they just violate and it ends up in code court and zoning. On the zoning calendar.
Or there's an order to remedy, right? And then they have to.
And I would say most, I would say, I don't know, 80%, if not more, but most of the wetland violations we get are fill situations.
Yeah.
Okay,
So the idea of being proactive you had this in effect in the,
Yeah, people
in the
would-
resolution, you put it in as a component to set it up with the approval.
That and public education, like letting people know that if you wanted, if you're gonna undertake fill activities in your property, look at the code, talk to the building department.
Your colleague there.
I just wanted to say something. It's also important about fill because if someone uses contaminated fill or anything, DEC gets brought in. So
Yeah.
it's good to have that education and get out in front of it before people do something improper and then DEC gets involved, the town gets involved, and it
Yeah.
just spirals out of control.
And 15 cubic yards was specifically identified because nobody wanted to prevent somebody from doing their like gardening or, bringing mulch on their property. So it's trying to prevent so we're not trying to create more obstacles or hurdles for somebody that's actually doing maintenance for their property. It's really more of like the regrading and that type of work. Any other questions about? Right, so next one, steep slopes, another one.
This was big.
This was another, again. In the current zoning, there was a couple, basically just very, very little regulation in terms of steep slopes. And this was something that was of concern, especially again, very similar to the excavation of fill, really focusing on stormwater runoff. And when you start actually cutting into steep slopes or creating steep slopes or building on steep slopes. So there's specifically now a requirement to have a steep slopes permit in order to be able to build onto steep slopes. So the process itself, there's specifically regulated activities and extremely steep slopes, which we're defining as 35% or more. Let me just make sure I'm saying this correctly, so I don't. Okay, so extremely steep slopes will require a planning board approval and specific waivers associated with them. If somebody is creating on new steep slopes or creating disturbance to steep slopes in the absence of steep slopes permit, that has to be issued by the building department itself. So there is certain exemptions. There's going to be normal ground maintenance or disturbance to steep slopes that are temporary as determined by the town engineer, or also work undertaken by the town of Lewisboro Highway Department. But other than that, you need to obtain a steep slopes permit. So for any application that involves a regularly disturbance in an area of a very steep slope or extremely steep slope, and very steep slopes are also defined as 25% to 35% require planning board approval. Then any application, just gets to that part. And then any application that's for the planning board may approve also for steep slopes permits that are subject to pending site plan, wetlands permit, subdivision, or special permit applications. So, and then the town engineer will be the proven authority for all other steep slopes permits. So
Could you repeat those last
sure,
two
I
sentences
will.
again?
I know, it's a little confusing. So there's 3 different categories. So the first is the town engineer can has the proven authority for all steep slopes permit applications. So not everything has to go to the planning board. The next level would be for any steep slope permit involving property that's subject to a pending site plan, wetlands permit, subdivision, or special permit application would go to the planning board. Or also as part of that application review, they would issue a steep slope permit. Or any application that requires a disturbance of a very steep slope or extremely steep slope, which is basically 25% or higher steep slopes, would require planning board approval.
You said town engineer, we don't have a town engineer.
So your town, it's your.
Code section.
Yeah, but we don't have a town engineer.
So
We have an outside consultant
So
who gets brought in,
Yeah.
because there are places that do have town engineers.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's my understanding that when we're required to bring in the consultant, that those fees get passed on to the applicant, is that correct?
Yes.
Yes. But I think,
I can go.
I was gonna, I was gonna say, isn't, Count Sessions, recognized as the wetlands engineer?
They are, yes, as you.
And
Um, yeah, but I don't think your code specifically has a town engineer designation.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's in the organization,
Yeah.
the organization meeting, that's when we
And
assigned
I
it.
think this could go to the building department, which can then turn to.
Approve that.
Yeah, to that.
Mhm. Right.
Yeah, I
I mean-
remember when we moved from our own engineer to a consultant, there was a bit about engineer for the town versus town engineer. And so maybe this language could include both of those, either
Yeah.
or,
Yeah.
just. to
It should be
anticipate.
clarified.
Because I think it might be left over from when we had a town engineer, I think in the current code, there is reference to. town
Right,
engineer.
right, and I think when we were, the assumption was that the town engineering
Mhm.
consultant, but we can clarify.
Yeah, it should
Maybe
be.
that's worth a global search too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and flag it to make it consistent
Yeah.
throughout.
And the wetlands order chorus chapter to 71.
Yes.
Now, there was, in that document, there was reference to penalties.
Yeah.
I think there were several penalties there, but there was a note about the town board approving the penalties.
Yeah, so these are penalties that, to a large extent, I mean. With a lot of codes, when you develop codes, you sometimes take language from other codes that seem to be successful, and this is one that, was. Came from another, another town code. So we're, I flagged it, because sometimes some communities like to have a lot of the penalties for similar chapters to all be the same.
So if someone knows they're gonna be building or doing something that involves affecting a steep slope, right? They make an application for the approval, but 9 times out of 10, you typically, under this type of provision, you're dealing with someone that's doing something that didn't get prior approval, right? So the way I'm used to dealing with it is that the building inspector goes out, he issues a violation, which I'm assuming that he has the authority to do under this section, and then they have to appear in court. Am I right? And then is it the judge then imposes the penalties? Or does it, the planning board impose the penalties? Does it get sent back to the planning board? Or are they
No.
separate penalties? Because I know that we have, in Harrison, there's fines up to this amount, or, depending on how long this per day, for the existence of whatever on the property per day. And that the court imposes the fine, not the planning board. Mm, Right, and I'm not quite sure that you can do that.
Civil penalties or administrative assessments, other than those in a court proceeding. Okay, that I've seen imposed, but there's got to be process to that as well.
I'm saying, doesn't there have to be a due process? So where would that be?
The steep slope amendment deals with this in sort of the traditional violation sense, like you're talking about, where there would be notice of violation, and if it goes to step up an imposition of penalties, it goes to your local justice court.
Right,
The wetlands code continues to have the existing model with regard to wetland violations
Mhm.
of there being an option of going to local justice court or going to the planning board. So in this instance, these penalties would be basically guidance for the court in terms of if there's going to be a penalty imposed, these are
Okay.
the specified fines.
There is one, if there is a criminal penalty, right, and if there was like and it had in here before, and a civil penalty. Before the civil penalty, like, they could afford an opportunity to be heard before the planning board. For, that, but that's what's in here, but that can always be
We
removed,
need to
right?
look at that.
Yeah,
Right,
and that's why I
because
flagged it.
I don't wanna run into a circumstance where the building, our building inspector issues a civil penalty, and then there's no due process. There's gotta be
Right.
some place
Yeah.
for the person to be heard to object. That becomes
looking at the proposed
An issue.
chapter, and it does have the, with, as fines for offenses in the civil penalties they're referred to the planning board,
Okay.
with an opportunity to heard upon due notice before those are imposed.
Right, and I
So
think,
there's a process there.
and I think since we're looking at, I mean, because there's a number of new chapters we're looking at, so we might as well maybe make everything sort of consistent, right? So that's why.
That would be a good thing.
Yeah.
I'm not,
The other
Yes,
thing.
the-
I'm not used to the planning board imposing civil penalties, so it's just, I mean, where I
Yeah.
am, it's typically the court.
Yeah.
Is the only.
It is an unusual model, but it's been in existence in Lewisboro for a long time with regard to the planning board. And we could have a whole discussion about
I
the
don't-
planning board's function in that regard.
My knee-jerk reaction is that that's not necessarily a good thing. There should really just be, in my opinion,
Yeah.
there should really be only one place that can issue fines. And the court make the recommendation that they make the appropriate applications and pay the appropriate application fees, you know, to the building department and get on the calendar with the planning board, but that the fines and the penalties should just be in court.
It seemed to, I mean, in my time there, it seemed to work well because you're drawing the expertise of the planning board and pursuing a policy of remediation and addressing it and kind of making a
Right.
fine really to be a last resort.
Yeah, so what happens with wetland violations with the planning board is the violations will come to the planning board. And typically at the outset, there is a discussion with the property owner, and more often than not, right up front, there is either like a guilty plea or just, you know, they won't contest.
Mhm.
Instead, they'll file a wetland permit. They then pursue remediation by way of the wetland permit. The wetland permit gets closed out. Oftentimes those permits will start as a planning board permit, get handled administratively, so at least some of that
Mhm.
burden gets eased. Once the remediation is done, they come back. And the planning board, their practice is to request basically a statement of costs. So what, you know, what did you have to pay for a landscape architect? What did you have to pay in terms of actual costs for mitigation, et cetera, and then makes a fine determination.
Mhm.
And at least since I've been there, when Rich was on the board, typically those costs will be looked at and the fines waived.
Be very much a mitigating factor
Yeah,
as far as
yeah,
seeing and
yeah.
pursuing the policy of
Right.
remediation and taking into account what they've had to pay in order to address.
I can also tell you that there are still, and they might still be out there, is from like way back when. There were determinations made by the planning board to levy really substantial fines. I call them substantial, thousands of dollars, right? But you know, the problem with that process is they're not self-executing. Like so the planning board says, you're fined at $1,000, here's some fine,
Right.
$5,000. There was no mechanism in the town code for that to like automatically become some sort of a lien or anything. So it would then be thrown back to the town board to decide whether you wanted to bring an action in local justice court to, you know, like a collection action.
Yeah.
So it's all, you know, the process is.
So
And maybe I'm betraying my view of like, maybe it's easier to go in the direction of justice court. And then come
well, that's what I'm
back.
saying,
But-
maybe it's worth looking at, don't panic though. That, I don't mean like right at this moment, but streamlining that a little bit more. Because I know that it gets frustrating when, in other situations where matters get batted back and forth between the town, and the planning board, the town board, the planning board, whatever it is, whether it's zoning or penalties, you know, no one wants to be the bad guy, right? So I don't like the idea that things get batted back and forth. And it'd be much easier if it was streamlined and, you know, penalties were issued as a result of a violation in justice court. That's just my opinion. And that the requirements be that they do what they're supposed to do with the planning board as part of taking care of or in consideration of whatever's gonna happen. I don't, that's
Yeah.
just,
I mean, the one good thing about it in terms of it all being in front of the planning board is, as I said, I think from a and it's not, this isn't what I get paid to opine on, but kind of from an overall fairness standpoint, I don't know if you have a schedule of fines that the justice court has to adhere to. The latitude the court has to say, we're gonna forego, whereas the planning board, when they're considering that dual role.
Yeah.
And that actually was litigated years ago, about whether that process of having the planning board serve as kind of, you know, adjudicatory, you know, penalty role, and also in permitting, whether that, you know, violated due process, and the code was upheld. At least here in Westchester, I'm not gonna go on the appellate division, but in any event.
Just
the-
seemed
the one-
complicated.
Yeah, I think the one thing in terms of, again. Not what I get paid to opine on, but in terms of fairness, I will say, I think the planning board's been eminently fair and. You know, trying to basically.
I'm not saying that they haven't been, I'm just saying it just seems like
It kind of works, but I agree, it's kind of.
it's all over the place. I'd like something that's a little more simple. And people understand the process. It just seems like there's a lot of moving parts. It could go this way, but it could go that way, and it'd just be nice to.
Maybe if we draw a flow chart in the educational process to let people know. Now, the other thing you had mentioned with the wetlands was talking about mapping as a green thing to know where things are. Had anybody talked about mapping where these 35-degree or plus angles are, slopes are?
Steep slopes.
In our.
Well, that's part of topographical
Lewisboro?
maps, right?
Yeah, but there's a very
Yeah.
complex like math in here about, you know, 20 feet long.
Right, yeah.
Before it kicks in, so I don't know that we're gonna be able to have, in any practical sense, have a map which captures all that.
That doesn't sound like it would be cheap anyway.
Mm,
Sounds like it would be a very expensive
Well,
Well, that's
process.
something the applicant should be looking.
Right.
Right, I mean, these are
I thought,
clearly,
but I thought Mary was
Yeah.
meaning similar to the idea of
Like a
mapping our
wetland.
wetlands,
yeah,
Yeah,
and that's expensive as it
Right.
is, let alone.
I mean, I think.
our GIS, the thing is, there are, just in Westchester County has GIS. I mean, we can easily put together, I mean, actually, we do have a map of steep slopes, I think, in your inventory analysis. So, I mean, that gives you a general sense of like, okay, this area potentially has steep slopes, and that might be something that just could give, trigger.
a heads up.
question. Yeah.
Give this group of people an early education
Yeah.
process about this particular
Yes.
new chapter.
What,
That's what I was thinking
yeah,
about.
Mary's points about, it's also a cost and time and energy and everything at the outset of the process. I mean, if you have to retain somebody to do your calculus equation to know if you have a steep slope problem before you even contemplate what you want to do. I mean, and that ties into one of the objectives, ways to facilitate the local approval and permitting process. It's also, making sure that early going, and we'll get into this, I'm sure, much more down the road, but ensuring that the planning process is a cost benefit analysis. In other words, based upon all the things you have to do, if you have a $10,000 driveway, it shouldn't cost you $30,000 to go through between lawyers and planners and everything for that.
Right.
Again,
It shouldn't be
it's-
cost prohibitive.
because those things are undermining a lot of the, big objectives as far as, development opportunities going forward for the next generation. The idea, you don't want somebody that's based upon what they think at the outset to shy away from investing and thinking outside the box and moving forward with a proposal that really may be imaginative and transformative in the town, whatever it might be.
What the steep slope?
You want a question on steep slopes? Okay, so we'll get back to you on the proposed revision to the thing, but we'll deal with that for all the proposed regulations. Okay, so we're done with, now we're on to the zoning. So the zoning chapter in the PDF that you have gets a little bit more detailed on the individual sections, so I'm gonna bring those various sections up. So the first really deals with definitions. what we did was we basically went through, we eliminated all definitions that were in your definitions section, but were nowhere else found in the chapter. So, and that happened a lot in communities. The other thing we did was we updated and modernized a number of definitions to kind of reflect newer standards. And then we also made sure if there were specific definitions within the code that were never defined, that we brought in definitions for that. So that's really what we did for that particular section. And I don't know if anybody has any particular questions.
So the
The only
purple
thing I
is
made a
all
note
new.
is there's,
If you would like.
I made a note that it's substantial change equals references only, there's a reference to an antenna structure, so. If I recall correctly in the document, looked out of place. I don't know if that was
Yeah, so there's
error, maybe.
so in the antenna, we're removing a number of the
I should just find
the
the
antenna definitions because we now
It's
have
really
new
so
wireless
what they did.
regulations
in
that
that.
we brought those in. So some of the antenna receiving or satellite dishes, they're definitions. And so they're no longer necessary because of the new wireless regulations.
Good. Cause it looked like it was an add to that.
Yeah, so for the
Structures.
antenna definition, you mean?
Yes,
Yes, that's the new antenna definition, and then there's an older antenna definition. So, and the new antenna,
so it wasn't out of place.
No.
Okay.
Yeah. any other questions with definitions? Right, so the next is exterior lighting. So,
What's the, just
yes,
the term bulk regulation, I've seen it,
Yeah.
does that have a
yeah.
uniform
yeah,
term when you
yeah.
say bulk regulations?
So bulk regulations is just what you think about bulk in terms of massing, size, setbacks. Right, anything related to when you're building and it's some sort of, it's about the actual structure itself is considered bulk regulations.
That's great.
So, the next section is exterior lighting standards. So again, this was something that was brought up by the community concerning lighting in terms of like new development, in terms of light trespassing onto neighboring properties and then also in general of like trying to incorporate new dark sky standards for new development. And so basically you had a total of like just a couple of regulations within your zoning. And so this really just updates and modernizes the requirements. It specifically really focuses on new development and especially like development so that you just don't have light encroaching on neighboring properties. It is not meant to prohibit people from being able to put like security lighting or safety lighting, but it's really just trying to control the amount of lighting so that people it doesn't become a nuisance to neighboring property.
So the people who already have their security lighting up are not going to feel threatened by the new wording.
Right, no, there's.
Well, they
Well,
they're in violation.
That's what that was my concern. This is the discussion that we had about the section, is that people who have already, let's say, they've spent thousands of dollars installing lighting along their driveway, let's say, and around their pool, et cetera. And so now the new regulation is in effect. My understanding, my first reading was that this applies to pre-existing lighting as well, and that they're gonna have to go back and change that investment to comply.
Wait,
with
so
the
I
new
think
regulation.
what you'll find with the requirements though, for the most part, so for like standards for residential structures, it just has. All outdoor lights and external illuminated signs shall be designed, located, installed and directed in such a manner as to prevent to the maximum extent practical light trespass at or across the property lines. So we specifically said in here, motion sensor security lighting is recommended to promote safety and to reduce the amount of night lighting in the town. So I think that's where we really focused on trying to give a little bit of flexibility for the residential area, because I think that was the concern, is that if people already have a lighting on their house, how is that, if you have the new lighting regulations? I think the more strict standards really focus on your non-residential or multifamily.
Because I was looking at applicability and it just says existing installations, all existing outdoor lighting on structure shall comply with the provisions of this section.
So if you have a lighting around your pool and it happens to be bright, as long as it's not, the light is not trespassing.
That's the idea.
Right, so it's okay to keep those.
Well,
bright
and
lights.
we have it here to the maximum extent practicable for the residential, right? So it's not saying that you can't ever possibly see any sort of, but you know, if all of a sudden you have a floodlight that goes right into your neighbor's, you know, living room, that's something that they could potentially complain and ask.
Correct, but if the floodlights existed for 15 years, is the neighbor now gonna say, ha ha? You know, I'm gonna make them change it because it doesn't comply. I'm just using that as an example. That was my only concern. I didn't want to have a law that, you know, we have people that invest a substantial amount of money in the lighting around their homes. And they did so prior to this, and to, that would, you know.
But the current code, I think the current code doesn't allow lighting to impact neighbors. So-
Right, it does, right,
Right.
right now, the current code specifically says. All lighting in connection with structures and uses shall be directed away from nearby streets and properties and shall
Right.
not cause any objectionable glare observable from such streets and properties.
Objectionable.
Yeah,
It's a little vague, but
yeah,
That's still, yeah, I mean,
Yeah, and
oh,
then-
but what, I mean, one of the, so what Andrew is like, was describing in my mind is like an aesthetic lighting as far as around somebody's property, which is just enhancing the community property around a pool or on the house, or, I mean,
An
it seems,
example.
it seems, but I'm just thinking about, like, if, now I'm thinking about now the technology coming into, so somebody has, say with all the animals and they have a motion sensor, and somebody has like a, you know, a Shea Stadium light that every time some animal goes there in the course of the night, it's lighting up everywhere. That wouldn't be, that wouldn't be an issue, sounds like.
well, I mean,
First of all, it's City Field.
Right, well, I choose to date myself.
It's still on Shea Stadium.
so, but no, well, technically, if somebody did have that and somebody said, you know, that's really causing a problem. The building department could potentially come out and say, yeah, we agree, like this is really lighting up your neighbors, we're asking you to maybe put some shields on it, you know, or.
Or redirect the
Right,
light.
or redirect the lighting, right, we're not necessarily saying you have to like remove it completely.
Because
no, I
actually,
get,
I
I
know
get the
somebody,
gist of where we're going.
Yeah. I know there's somebody actually in town, I know who's made their neighbor where, because of safety concerns, they have floodlights which literally go into the next door neighbor's house.
Right.
And because of the line side, but I mean, just something that addresses that kind of thing.
How about lights that, you know, you see some properties lights that shine up into the trees? Did that come up in a workshop? Because I know once instance.
Like landscaping lights, the
Yeah,
uplighting
but they're on all night and they're shining up on the trees and
Right, so I think,
neighbor doesn't like it.
right, newer standards are going to be downcast lighting as opposed to. I mean, I think there's been a lot of, well, besides the fact, it's like, you know, the dark sky movement. In terms of it, there seems to be a lot of studies that have demonstrated that, you know, it does affect like habitats and animals,
Yes,
right?
it does have a detrimental impact on the well-being of nature,
Right.
of the creatures that we share the environment.
So the International Dark Sky Association standards were not,
They weren't adopted 100%, but a lot of the standards were, because the dark sky standards are a lot more stringent. And I think the committee felt that to find a middle ground so that people, you know, so that it's not so stringent in terms of lighting. But a lot of the, what I'm gonna say, the key dark sky standard provisions, such as like that the LED coverage shall exceed like 3,000 kelvins, or that, you know, the light trespass should only be so many foot candles, you know, on the adjacent properties. Those are the types of things that were brought in.
They're supposed to enforce that.
So ultimately, what ends up happening, I
code
mean,
enforcement,
yeah, code enforcement.
Come out for
AKA
the,
our building.
for the overnight shift to come out and see if there's a lighting issue, I mean, you know.
Potentially.
I think it's happened.
This is very common in a lot of places to have these types of lighting standards.
Yeah.
Because there have been issues.
And I think especially with, I'll say this, especially with like solar. It's a lot easier to buy like cheap lights and just put in your yard and, people don't think about how much that could potentially, sometimes cause a nuisance in terms of maintenance. So. Yeah, questions on that? So now we're on. Well, that was the older version. The newer version is not conjunction. All right, so landscaping. So this one is also new landscaping standards. These landscaping standards specifically focus on site plan subdivision or special use permit applications. And this is really to bring in bring in the requirements for landscaping, as well as trying to avoid invasive species and bring in more native species. Part of this was really dealing with a lot of people wanting to see some more beautification, especially in the commercial areas and along their roadways. And so this was one way of being able to bring in some additional requirements in terms of for site plan written subdivision regulations.
Yeah, this has nothing to do with the landscaping in front of one's front door,
No, it's not.
just to be clear.
All right, so now into.
Oh, I did have one question.
sure.
I did have, so it requires, indicates that the landscape architects need to be licensed in the state, licensed or registered in the state of New York.
Yes.
Is that a mandatory requirement?
It was just, well, we were recommending that for in terms of for specifically for landscape plans, for site plans and for subdivisions and special permits. So it's your site plan regulations are mostly for, and I can tell you exactly, but they're mostly for when you're dealing with your commercial and multifamily residential, not your single family.
No, I know, I know that there are many entities that use out-of-state landscape architects, especially because we're so close to Connecticut, that I didn't know, like, there's another section where we talked about having to bring in, like, to have your septic pumped, it's required by county law that they be
License.
right, or the tree guys, the same kind of thing. So that's why I was asking if that was absolutely necessary.
So we can remove it and just say licensed or registered or landscape architects. We just-
That might be good.
Okay. Just gonna make a note. All right. So now we're gonna get into the district regulations. So if anybody ever took a look at the red line version, it is very, very marked up. And so
Yes.
It's gonna be elementary.
So so just to explain the reasoning behind that, is that basically your zoning had, for each and every zoning district, it wrote out specifically all the uses. And what we did was we took all those uses and put them into a table. So that now people, if they're in a particular zoning district, can see all the uses that are allowed within the zoning district from the table, as opposed to having to read through the zoning.
Yeah, it's very
That makes
helpful,
sense.
very, very helpful.
And I think what we found through that, by doing that exercise, we actually found like different names for similar uses. And what we also found were that some uses were not included, which really should have been included. So we were able to really straighten that up and clean that up for the town. So that's why you see a lot of I guess track changes in these particular sections. But for the most part, I will highlight a couple of things that I think are important. So first, in terms of a couple other things that we moved around. We moved specifically certain regulations to certain zoning districts and kind of brought them together, especially if it dealt with like multifamily. We brought them all under the multifamily section. It was incorporated certain purposes for certain business districts specifically to highlight what the purpose is, because you typically have a purpose for each of the districts. We also specifically focused on, for example, we updated text to reflect like open meetings laws. We also focused on renaming the RMF zoning section to multifamily dwellings. Because before it had RMF, but then it also referred to other zoning sections in that section, so it's now just a multifamily section. The other thing, the other couple things that I want to highlight, specifically deal with some of the more substantive changes. And this deals with, we added now, for in your residential districts, you were always allowed to have a certain number of ranching animals. And you were always allowed to have so many number of domestic farm animals.
What's a ranching animal?
Well, that's the question. So, ranching animal, really focuses on, right now, we are specifically, and I can get you the definition, just give me 1 second.
Not talking cattle or buffalo, are we?
Well, not buffalo.
No,
No cattle,
domestic
cows.
farm animal.
Right.
There is a definition. Is that in this
Steer.
table?
The definitions in the definition.
Yeah, that's, yeah. Check.
Sheep, goats, pig, cattle.
Llamas?
All right,
Llamas,
so,
alpacas.
Yeah,
Oh, there.
llamas, alpacas, it's all there.
so ranching is the breeding, raising, or managing of farm animals, basically on an animal farm. In the case of horses, it's also be training of horses. So it focuses on farm animals. That's really the definition of ranching animals. And specifically in terms of,
So farm animals, is that defined?
yeah, so in animals,
That's not in the table.
But it's defined somewhere.
It's defined there, yeah.
so you have in your specifically in your code, you specifically refer to ranching and raising of farm, of field and garden crops. And so ranching refers to that definition of farm animals. And in that section, we specifically identify now the types of ranching animals that can happen, which were allowed, which are sheep, goats, pigs. We have cattle, horses, poultry, and alpacas. Basically llamas. Those are the ones that we brought in. Prior to that, you didn't have any definition of what a ranching animal was. Beyond just a farm animal, so this time we decided to specifically identify the types of farm animals. And we are specifically now providing minimum lot sizes and numbers per acre. Where before you had, I believe it was, I think it was like one animal per.
One animal per acre.
Yeah, I think
Yeah, it was not less,
Adopt.
it was not less than 2 acres of land for the first animal and 1 acre of land for each additional animal, which really was a lot for, it could be, for example, like right, you don't need 3 acres for 3 goats. So we better defined that in terms of how many acres would you need for certain types of animals.
So rooster or chicken or something.
Yeah,
What's sorry, away from my
yeah,
No,
so
so right
farm
now we
animals from
have-
elementary
we have
school. I
poultry,
haven't,
we have poultry.
grandpa's farm, I could start saying,
it's in
but
that.
Yeah, it is in the table for the number per acre is no more than 10 birds per half an acre, and the maximum number of adult animals permitted is 50.
Which would be.
Roosters though, because we can't.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so in the,
Not specific.
we
Yeah.
did deal with roosters, I gotta just.
I'm sure there was a lot of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have, this is specifically, so for the farms themselves, right, if you actually had a farm and you had a ranching farm, we didn't prohibit roosters. But if you are to have what we're calling domestic farm animals, which allows certain farm animals on people's individual private properties, roosters are.
That's when are prohibited? Okay.
prohibited.
Yes, yeah.
That's what we're suggesting right now, and that's
Say that
mostly
again, this is a prohibited where?
for if you were to have like a residential home and you had certain farm animals. Now that's up to the town board. We can easily remove that. A lot of communities have that in there because of the fact that sometimes they'll get the noise complaints. The roosters are bothering them, but you know. But that's up to the town if you prefer. If it's not an issue and you know people have roosters and if you'd like to remove that, we can. It's not prohibited for the actual farms or people that are actually doing the ranching. But for the individual homeowners, we did have it.
Should consider. Removing.
Removing.
I think that's what we say, I think that's good.
Correct.
Yeah.
Remove it? No, I mean,
Keep
it.
no roosters allowed in residential areas.
Well, that's what we have right now.
Oh, that's what we have.
Yeah,
now.
that's what you have
Got
right
it.
now.
Okay.
But
okay.
if for some reason the board wanted to, because a lot of communities typically have that provision in there because of the concern with the roosters.
Right,
No,
Because the
We have-
sun comes up really early.
Yeah.
and someone that works
some-
overnight comes home
Yeah.
early in the morning, I've had that complaint.
Yeah.
well, there are many residents that have chickens in town.
Yes.
And roosters don't only crow.
Yeah, he's got,
Yeah,
it.
no.
yeah,
Those are roosters, right?
I don't know,
It's true.
I haven't heard him.
I'm coming over.
Not as close as you are, yes.
And again, as we go through the public hearing process, you know, this will be good. I mean, clearly these provisions have been out there amongst the public, but through the public hearing process, you know, if people have concerns with some of the suggestions we're having, we'll be able to reach out.
And the other point, just with regard to the, not the domestic, but the larger farm operations, we also have to be mindful of limitations that are put on the town under ag and markets law. And not adopting regulations that are, you know, make it difficult or
And for our
Intentional.
friends at home, Agamat is,
the New York State
Agricultural
Agriculture and Markets
Markets.
Law. And
Thank you.
you have agricultural districts in the community that.
Yeah, we do.
You know, farming practices are, they get a degree of protection under state law, so
Right.
we're sensitive to that. We're comfortable that nothing.
So
goes in
in that case, state law supersedes local.
No, well, no, it's basically the state commissioner of agriculture can look to see if your local regulations actually impinge or create an undue burden on farming and ag districts, but they're okay.
Okay.
That includes like the trees, maple syrup, tree stuff that's within the agricultural market.
If you're in an ag district.
Right.
Okay, and yeah, and just to add to Justin's point is that, when we were developing these, we actually took them from a community upstate. I believe it was Mamakating that somebody else in my, office worked on, and they had somebody who worked for the Ag and Market department on the, committee, and that's how they came up with the standard. So we felt, we also didn't double check that, but we felt very comfortable with that. Right, then, all right, so the next thing I want to talk about, another substantive change, was dealing with, let's talk about the, multifamily dwellings. So in here, a couple of things, we did shift just a little bit. Do you already allow within your zoning? You already allow for multifamily in your commercial districts. But what you had previously. Yeah, so your commercial districts are your CC 20, your SU, your RV, and your GB zoning districts.
What is Route 20? What is Lewisboro Commons? What's that current zoning there?
That's,
That was CC.
that was CC 20, and then it's for RMF, right? Eventual family.
No, it's still CC 20, but the RMF standards were, I think, pulled into the CC 20
Yes.
in permitted in CC 20, right?
Right, okay,
Right,
which is
yeah.
what allowed them
Yeah,
to
right.
develop, that's right, yeah.
So, what you typically have, and right now in your code, you have a lot upon which multifamily dwellings are to be constructed. Shall have a gross lot area of not less than 15 acres, except when located within the CC 20 SU, RB, or GB zoning districts. And in which case, right now, currently, you require 5 acres in order to be able to develop any sort of multifamily housing in those zoning districts. And the maximum that you have in right now is 2 dwelling units per acre for any multifamily housing in those commercial zoning districts, right? So if you wanted to have a mixed use, like, you know, if you wanted to have some mixed use or put some residential on the top of some of your commercial, you would need 5 acres and you can only have 2 dwelling units per acre. So what we suggested was to reduce the 5 acres to 2 acres, right? So just to maybe, because one of the issues that we heard throughout the comprehensive plan process was that there should be more housing options potentially for people, but people wanted to be able to come up with creative solutions in terms of trying to get them into maybe already some developed areas in the commercial districts, and people did say they were comfortable with having some housing in the hamlet areas. But you already allow that, so it was like, so we were like, what's maybe causing that not to, you know, and I understand that there's definitely with your sewer and, you know, we get that would have to be investigated. But from 5 acres to 2 acres, we thought this might nudge it a little bit in that direction. And then we also suggested instead of 2 density units per acre, which is basically 2 dwelling units per acre, we were suggesting maybe 4 dwelling units per acre.
And this is in the commercial?
In the commercial.
Or is there any, discussion about putting a secondary component or factor as far as proximity from the water aspect of it?
Right,
And proximity to the nearest well, for example.
Right, so there is specific language in there that there has to be, we're in the opinion of the planning board, connecting to existing facilities are possible and warranted sanitary sewers or other water mains shall be connected. This is already part of you're already requiring that, so we kept that in as it's a very important component. And then it specifically says where connection to existing off-site water or sewer facilities is not possible, then essential water supply or sewage treatment systems shall be designed or constructed. And then it also, there's specifically requirements dealing with sewer and water, so it cannot happen unless they're able to demonstrate.
It just seems that that's kind of backwards, because in the town, the areas, if you looked at the whole town over time, the places that haven't gotten developed is because there's a water issue. So that essentially should be that. I mean, it's so significant, you know.
When you say because there's a water issue, what water issue? Lack of
or usable
ability
water,
to
and to the extent there's, if
fill a
you
well.
go around, to the extent you look around town and historically, any large, like, why hasn't there been large development in this area? It's usually a water issue, some kind of water related issue, as far as being able to tie into something, or an exorbitant cost, or problem with drilling. It seems, what I'm getting at, there should be some kind of threshold inquiry before somebody's going down in pursuit of, you know, multifamily.
Well, that's what they do typically, like take Lewisboro Commons. I mean, they did well, they test, right, to make sure there's water. So they do, I forget what they call it, test.
Yeah, subject to our, well,
So, yeah,
Right,
they'll find an aquifer and they run a.
Absolutely, but that's deep into the process, what I'm getting at. In other words, if you're trying to develop and allow more density, the first thing you should be checking out before anything to see if it's viable based upon water.
I think they do, I think normally someone will do that.
And
They'll
then
do
I think
that
we're not
first.
talking about like, you know, putting a skyscraper in it, it's
No,
like.
I'm talking about this. I'm talking about exactly
No,
what I
I-
said here. You
right,
know, so if you have
okay.
2 acres or 5 acres and you're making the density 2 per acre, so let's say somebody wants to put whatever 2 times 2 or 4 or 6 units, the first thing they should do before doing that is to have some kind of threshold inquiry as to whether it's going to be viable from a water situation.
But they do.
And I
They do that.
think, and these are really focused on your commercial districts, which already have development there, right? So there's a higher chance that they already have that kind of capability to add in a couple other dwelling units onto those properties, as opposed to, if you were saying, in some of your undeveloped areas where you would have to investigate that.
Not necessarily, in the Hamlet areas, they have a lot of water capacity issues, that's part of the problem.
So
Yeah.
what are you suggesting that that there be some other process that gets inserted here, or, I mean, because I think this is gonna be something that someone who's looking at the site will be doing that as a sort of feasibility.
Right.
For the.
I mean,
the
this even
project.
ties to kind of what Mary's talking about, is the way to get certain information town-wide before somebody's gonna invest. In other words, let's say somebody wants to develop an multi-family in something. They have to buy the property first. And they have to invest in it with an eye towards
Or
development.
they
That's why
could-
they're gonna be doing
They
it.
could, and Judd probably knows better than I, but they could buy, I mean, a contingent upon
Yeah.
tests that
But
they
it's,
Yeah.
do.
Right.
they really do.
Yeah.
Right.
So they're not gonna buy the property unless they can determine there's a water supply.
And the town is not gonna do a survey of every.
No, not
lot
going, it
to-
just, yeah.
Yeah.
We haven't got the money.
No, I think practically speaking, it's on the potential buyer to.
What I'm getting at, a lot of I'm looking at a lot of what the plan is talking about further development when by and large, the town is built out for all intents and purposes.
I think this though also in terms of what this is encouraging is valid. It's kind of like infill in a lot of ways,
Yeah.
just trying to find those places in the commercial. Area. You've got potential for.
You know, we
I
talked
like
about
you said,
this
nothing
unit in
to-
Pound Ridge here that they put in, that got a lot of
Hamlet
praise. I
census.
think there's
Yeah,
six.
Example.
Right.
With the senior housing?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Right,
things like that.
Yeah, no, it's all, I'm in agreement with all. I'm just saying it should be a mechanism where somebody without an exorbitant amount, if you want to encourage that policy, there should be a way that somebody can do it. With a minimum of cost to see if it's worthwhile.
I think once we get the comprehensive plans set, one of the next steps we can do is let people know in a clear and transparent, easy to understand language that this is what procedures you have to follow. Whether it's planning board or ZBA or wetlands.
So what you're discussing is still on the
Oh,
section 220,
yeah, it's like,
23, 24.
sorry, just a minute. Yeah, 220-26,
26, so
Yeah.
we
Which one
So
is
we're-
6?
yeah.
skipped over the FFH, but
Yeah, that,
That's-
so most of that was like really administrative, that was
Yeah.
anything, so I'm down just touching upon the substances. So.
Right.
got it, yeah.
So, and then the other thing I wanna talk about, since we're talking about density, is another suggestion was a senior housing floating zone. And this was another way of trying to come up with something, so there was concerns from the public, one, to try to allow for people to basically remain within the town of Lewisboro as they age. And also that there was definitely concerns from certain hamlet areas that, that a lot of development takes place in their hamlet areas versus other hamlet areas. So one of the things that we came up with was senior housing floating zone. It again would allow for up to 4 dwelling units per acre. This would be something that you would have to basically, it would be a town board petition, right? So somebody would petition the town board to say, we'd like to land this particular floating zone in this particular area of the town. And then they would have to petition for the town board to approve that landing of that particular zone. And there's a number of different criteria for the senior housing overlay in terms of clustering, in terms of development, preservation of open space. But basically, it would allow for an opportunity for the town to have additional types of housing within the community. If the property does, would be able to provide the water, the sewer, if it does make sense for the town.
So just explain so everybody understands what a floating zone is.
Sure. So a floating zone is a zone that can be landed anywhere within a community as long as it meets certain criteria. Right, and the criteria is laid out within the floating zone. And then it's become, so it's not, it's at the discretion of the town board. So it's not something that's automatic, it's something that the town board would have to approve, and you would have to go through an environmental review process to confirm that, yes, it would not have a significant impact on the community.
So it's changing the zoning of a particular parcel in a location which already has different zoning in place.
But you can't put
I
it
don't
in
think
the
it's changing the
wetlands.
zoning.
Well, it's
Right.
it does in the sense, it's like an overlay, it's a floating zone, so
it's already
once the
there.
petition is approved. That property is subject to the floating zone, but what it does is. The floating zone concept is, as Valerie said, if I'm looking at Lewisboro and I'm interested in development of senior housing. Rather than having to kind of wonder what are the standards the town would look at, and is this something positioned for this particular area that would work? I at least have a set of targets and specified parameters that are going to guide my approach to the town board and give the town board kind of, a framework to evaluate whether the zone would work or not.
So
Ultimately, it still is in the town board's.
So if Lewisboro Elementary, closed down and somebody was gonna make it a senior housing, and found, oh, it's in a residential neighborhood. You have a set of criteria to say, is that project?
Is that
Right.
right? And does it fit within something we've identified as something that would be more than like palatable, but something that would work within our kind of zoning construct for this particular property?
Right, it's like the zone's gonna have like a set of criteria, a set of rules.
Right.
Someone sees it, they're gonna look for property and they say, you know what, this property seems to meet all the criteria. Let's ask the town board.
That's it.
That's what
That's
happens.
what
And the town board either gives a thumbs up, yes, we think that it meets our criteria, or thumbs down.
With an accompanying environmental review.
Well, we're not sure,
Yeah.
go back and try again.
Was there ever any discussion, and on that point, is it legally viable? And I have no idea, if you had, for example, over the years, been the idea whether you can have workforce housing and or volunteer
First
housing,
responder.
first responder housing, right? Is there any way, let's say could you legally viably do it if you had a floating zone which had, say, seniors and first responders and, people, could you do that legally? Is that the legally viable option? Because going back to how the housing
Right.
settlement was, and well, I don't know, is that still where it is today? So seniors, you can do it for the floating zone, and other groups you can't?
Well, senior housing you can do under federal law.
They're a protected
Permitted-
class.
you're permitted to create and develop housing that is targeted for the occupants of a specified age, right?
And what does that mean now? What does the age mean?
Just
It's-
divided
Don't
over-
don't they call it age appropriate housing?
Yeah.
So it's,
They're a protected
that's
class.
55 is what it's now? Okay.
Do you need
So
a
yes, you would
specific
qualify.
number right now? Can you just?
Yeah. No, I'm just seeing it, because that's important as part of the.
To your point, I don't think for first responders, you can't.
Yeah, the work,
do that.
the
Workforce housing is
Workforce
not.
housing.
continues to be an issue.
Okay, all right.
Right, and we do have in here, and this is no different than you already have in your other regulations, you do have a provision in, and this is just taken directly from your code, that planning board may authorize an increase in permitted density by not more than 50% if the applicant constructs at least 1/3 of the additional densities as affordable,
That's for
permanently furthering fair housing. So that's something that could be an option if for some reason the town
Right.
board decided they wanted that as part of their. And just in terms of, we're suggesting this to, again, be 15 acres. Again, it's very similar to your multifamily district regulations, like it's 15 acres. Except when you're located in your commercial districts, and that could be a minimum of 2 acres. So it's almost very similar in terms of that, but now this allows for this to be located in potentially up. And then the next big section deals with actually, we would move on to, the rest is really, the last is the district use regulations, which deals with, green energy, but we'll talk about that just a little bit later on.
The ones before that, those are just.
Those are all minor, right, yeah. Yeah.
For the folks at home, we're just cleaning it up.
Yes, cleaning up, yes. All right, so then the next big section is supplemental regulations, and this deals with special permit uses. All we did here, so we're done with we're done with the district regulations and we're on to the supplemental regulations. The biggest change here is we really, one of the things that we noticed that you had the zoning board being able to approve certain special permits, planning board approved other special permits. And so we suggested that should be consolidated, so you didn't have people bouncing between a couple different boards. And that the town board is specifically would approve the special permit for battery energy storage systems and solar energy storage systems for like your larger both. And that's a separate, we'll get into a little bit more detail on those two, but those are the only times the town board would deal with a special use permit. And then the zoning board now really only deals with special use permits dealing with like basically any use that was legally established as a special permit use that has been deleted or amended, right? So it's just really minor things or agency operated boarding homes. So very little special permits now would be going to the zoning board and the rest would be going to the planning board.
Why was it decided that they go to the planning board instead?
Because
And
there were a
going to the
lot of,
zoning
there
board.
were a lot of special use permits that were already at the planning board.
Mhm.
And then a lot of times planning boards also do site plan approval, so it's just trying to streamline the process so that people didn't have to bounce between two. Oh, I have.
Oh, you do, okay.
So that was the decision to do that,
Okay,
to try to help streamline the approval process. So, I mean, just for the, Andrew, before, like, for example, the zoning board of appeals dealt with a special use permit for private kennels and ranching and temporary stands for sale and display of field and garden crops and accessory wineries, but then the planning board dealt with like everything else, and it didn't make any sense why the zoning board would deal with those random special use
Well,
permits.
did they each deal with an equal number of special uses, or did the planning board have most of them, like more?
I think the planning board have more,
Yeah.
and the problem is that oftentimes, if you're applying for a special use permit, you're also gonna have to get a site development plan approval, which means you're now like, you're going to two boards. You're going to the planning board for site plan approval and the zoning board for special permit. So why not just bundle it in front of one board?
Okay. I don't know,
It was us.
some changes I will like.
The other change we did was the accessory apartment, so I want to just touch upon that a little bit. So again, we really focused on, we clarified a little bit more on the maximum square footage, right? So we have a minimum of 300 square feet, but we've said specifically or maximum of 800 square feet. And then we specifically looked at you have another provision which allows for, it's called accessory dwelling units. So you do allow for another principal detached one family home on a property. And it specifically though required 20 acres in order to have that second principal dwelling.
Wow.
And so we thought, again, we were looking at ways to come up with adding some additional housing options within the town of Lewisboro, but while still maintaining your overall character and also basically your framework that you already have established. And so what we suggested, one of the requirements of this was that they had to demonstrate that the land could be subdivided. Well, yes. And so you're right now, a lot of your zoning is 1 acre, 2 acre, or 4 acre zoning. And so we're requiring now, you can do that, but it has to be a minimum of 2 times the, so if you're in 4-acre zoning, you would have to have 8 acres. And you would still have to show or demonstrate that you would be able to subdivide that property, right? But this would still allow for that secondary principal dwelling to be located on your property. So you could still have basically, in essence, an accessory dwelling, but it would be separate from, it would be able to be subdivided.
And this way, you do it this way, then you don't have situations where somebody is using this to then turn around and say, oh, but I'm gonna sell this off, and then they skirted around the.
Right, right, exactly.
So if someone has, I'm new to this part of the ADUs, if someone has a 2-acre lot, and they're in a 2-acre zone, then they can't put in an ADU because they can't subdivide it.
So you have 2 different provisions. You actually have accessory apartment that you have, so you have, so
Oh,
one is an
right.
accessory apartment, which is a unit that could be within a house.
Mm,
The other one is developing a separate
right,
unit completely separated from the house.
And that's where the 20-acre minimum.
That was where the 20-acre minimum came into play, and
Right.
so we're suggesting, let's reduce it to maybe double your property area instead of 20 acres right now, and then we'll see how that unfolds. But your accessory dwelling units requires a minimum of 1/2 acre.
And that means an apartment on, like
Right.
in your garage or in your
Correct.
main.
In the
dwelling.
already existing structures of your property.
Right.
Right.
So.
So it's a little bit, so if the accessory dwelling allows for it allows for the barn, garage, or already within your
Yep.
your principal dwelling. The other one allows for 2.
The
separate-
creation of a
Right.
new and
Second.
separate.
Yes.
So if somebody, in one of the larger subdivisions in town without a name, with a large, 4,000, 3,000 or 4,000 square foot house, as a matter of right, if they wanted to make
The
a
garage,
mother or
Right,
in the
a mother,
house itself,
daughter, or
mother,
whatever,
they
yeah.
can do that as a matter of right.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But if they wanted to add a separate structure,
or you needed 20 acres.
right, if they wanted to put in a barn and on the second floor of the barn, they wanted to make it a unit, that would then the second set of requirements come in.
Right, and I think it was like, so I think that you do have a caveat in here for barns for accessory dwelling units, so you probably could do that there. But if for some reason you wanted to build like almost a smaller home on your
Mhm.
property.
Cottage
Yeah,
or,
cottage or something like that, you would need 20 acres to do that. Now we're saying you would just need double the amount, and you can
Mhm.
then demonstrate that, yes, if at some point in time you decide to sell it. You sell your property and somebody wants to come in and subdivide it, you would be able to subdivide it legally according to your.
But if it's a pre-existing barn, I assume you're saying. that-
Well, no, even
No.
just the barn itself, is there's a
There's
caveat
an
in here
exception.
for an accessory apartment, you can just have an accessory apartment in a barn. It's when you
Okay.
actually are developing a
whole new
independent,
building.
right, single structure.
Other than a
As
barn.
well.
yeah.
Other than a barn.
It can't be a brand
If you're
new.
doubling
like
So you
they're
require
talking about
doubling the
incentives
minimum
and stuff.
acreage for that zoning district.
the minimum.
so if someone builds a pool house and they want to rent it out, then it falls under this.
I'm sorry, to distinguish the barn from me.
It's separate, it's separate. If it's any already existing structures
Right.
fall within the first, that you're allowed to put an accessory unit in any
Oh,
of those.
so that's-
Yeah.
If you build a new structure
Yeah.
other than a barn, then the new requirements come in. But if you build a barn because of
to
the
use as a
nature
barn.
to use as a barn
Okay.
and you want to put
Okay.
an accessory unit and you can do
You
that
can do
because
that.
of the nature of what a barn is.
Okay,
Right.
okay,
Right.
you could build a barn and have an apartment on the top
Yes.
floor.
But your accessory
That's
dwelling.
an exception.
Right, your accessory residence
Okay.
dwelling is incidental and subordinate to the principal detached one-family dwelling and located on the same lot. That is, so it's like, it's a subordinate additional house, but it's subordinate to the principal dwelling.
Is one back to the one family, just
Cave house
thinking of like
quality.
housing
Yeah.
opportunities, is the family, this family is a defined term.
Yes.
And has it been changed from what it was?
We did tweak it.
Yeah.
Hmm.
We have right now a group of individuals related by blood, marriage, or legal adoption, or not more than 4 individuals who are not related by blood, marriage, or legal adoption, occupying a dwelling unit and living and cooking together as a single housekeeping unit.
That's what we have.
That's the new definition.
That's the new definition.
Can you say that again? I'm sorry.
A group of individuals by blood, marriage, or legal adoption, or not more than 4 individuals who are not related by blood, marriage, or legal adoption, occupying a dwelling unit and living and cooking together as a single housekeeping unit.
So Golden Girls would meet that
That's
definition.
correct. It's a great analogy, but yes.
And now we get into Judd for communications.
Yes, so the wireless code is really in need of updating, one, to bring it in line with changes over time in federal law. And also to create or to recognize the, you know, a potential growing trend towards small cell facilities. So what we've done is we've taken kind of the old code, really kind of discarded it in some ways, and we've created basically a tiered system of approvals, all through the planning board, as the approving agency, which is differing degrees of what needs to be established for purposes of approvals. So you can have like a tier 1 or one group of approvals that would deal with the potential small cell facilities that are developing and are, you know, smaller facilities that utilize existing structures, utility poles and the like, with kind of an eased approval process. And then you step up if you're talking about sort of the traditional construction of monopoles, towers, et cetera. Really just trying to streamline the process and as one to like I said, align it with federal standards, including the implementation of time periods, determination of applications when they come in, which we don't have and which we should. And also, like I said, just trying to recognize differing degrees of scrutiny for proposed installations.
The AAB give some input on this?
We, no, and initially there was, I had looked at the code and thought, do we still need AAB? And had proposed maybe we don't. But looking at it and having discussions in the workshop, it was like, no, you should, because it truly is just an advisory board. And I, obviously, as this moves into like full consideration, it should be looked at by AAB. And I, the AAB is going to continue to be, you know, a board under the code. There's no proposal to, you know, disband it or limit its, you know, its purview that we should be involved.
Should be changed to the wireless advisories.
Yeah, it might be actually.
Talked about that,
Yeah,
yes,
it might make sense, yeah, yeah.
Map it right to it.
Or communication,
Telecommunications, yeah,
to bring it into.
yeah, just to make it right,
Thank you.
yes. Right.
Val, what
Hey,
section is the
what did
definition of family under?
It's under the definitions.
At the top of
Yeah,
the top of the document?
yeah, section 3, I think it is.
Okay.
And that was one where I mean, you can get very complicated definitions of families.
Yeah,
Johnson and I went back and forth. We felt that was at least a simple one, and then for some reason the town, I mean, some communities actually have concerns with like, you know, overcrowded housing and then those issues. And we have to
That's
get a little
right.
bit more specific, but we didn't get that sense here, and so we went with a little bit more simplified, but.
you read my mind.
the underline is the new language, and then
So wait, you said section 3?
um.
I'm sorry, I just, what page
Oh, no,
Definition.
yeah,
at the very top? Of the document?
If you go to Control F,
This is an iPad,
oh, I'm sorry.
that's okay.
I think, I have them.
Got it here if you want. See,
A definition, okay, that's,
Right now you had a group of related individuals or not more than 4 unrelated individuals living and cooking together as a single housekeeping unit.
External.
And that's a really old definition, so that's when we updated it by bringing in like related by what, a marriage, a legal adoption, cause you know,
that wasn't the part that I was pondering, it was the second part that I was pondering.
but not more than
The
4.
4.
Yeah, so the 4 is from your, right now, currently in your.
Yeah,
So, I mean, that's something that can be tweaked.
Are you proposing something different?
no,
Right,
I'm
no.
just thinking about it, I'm every time I hear it, I feel differently about it, so I'm just processing, that's all.
It's a number.
Yeah.
And there are families who have more and families who have less.
Right, but that's the section that says not non-related. There's a section that describes,
In the current code,
right. No, in the
Or
new
In
definition,
the update.
there's two. That's all, I just wanna look at it and read it, I'm not saying anything good or bad about it, I'm just saying I'm processing.
so I think the wireless regulations, that was a good addition. So,
Right,
Yeah, it's basically updating.
Yeah.
so the next couple sections, the site plan approval section is just, if that's all it is updating to current practices in New York State Village, I mean, town law. So basically, that's all that is doing for that. And then, off-street parking. What we did there was we really just incorporated more shared space parking requirements, as well as incorporating some EV charging spaces and, general minimum requirements to update, like reflecting current standards. And we did provide a little bit of parameters in terms of, you know, approvals for EV charging stations. Again, I think eventually New York State will probably come out with a model code or model regulations, and then those can be substituted, but for now, we're finding that the technology's catching up quicker than, you know, than the state has provided any sort of model language, and we feel that you should probably consider putting some regulations in now, because I'm already dealing, especially down county, there's a lot of EV charging, especially third-party companies coming in and wanting to install EV charging stations, so it's only a matter of time till Lewisboro starts seeing.
Westchester County is not contemplating any regulations or legislation on this, right, for uniformity.
No, we haven't seen anything. So. But since I've been working on a few communities, there will be a little bit of news. But not because of any model, but just because a lot of communities are coming up with the same issue right now. So.
You're the common denominator.
Right. No, but we did look at some, New Jersey already has some model laws, so we looked at some of the like regulations, and New York State, the New York State buildings department, it's not the buildings department, but it's the one who regulates the buildings code, did come out with certain requirements in terms of the types of EV charging that require certain permits, and what types of, whether they meet the uniform code versus, you know, other types of building code or fire code safety. So we worked some of that.
Is there anything actually we're contemplating in our code as far as EV chargers, electric vehicles at home? Or is it what, as far as charging?
In, you know, in
Yeah.
single family residences.
Yes, by way of,
No, and I think a lot of that would just be dictated by New York State. Fire protection, building code,
Mm.
both the zoning code.
is there anything in the building code now as far as that?
Well,
If I want to charge
Only
my
the
electric,
electric code, which is state.
Right, and it,
Yeah.
right, and so the new language does have specifically refers to level 1 and level 2 EV charging stations, the uniform code and the NFPA 70, which is like the National Fire Protection patents, and those are the two components that New York State specifically said that all, and they're not, nobody has to get a particular permit or anything, it's just the fact that if for some reason there is something that they need to meet those codes in order for it. Which,
It would be like installing a generator. You have to follow certain, you have to follow all the codes and have it inspected properly.
That's what I'm saying, like in a multi-family,
Yeah, but
Developments
you
in
just
town,
like
like-
single.
well, I'm just now, next.
Right,
point.
so
So
the-
like in, what, in Oak Ridge or Meadows, is there anything, if somebody has a garage and what they want to put it electric, electric.
If they have a
EV,
garage. I guess
But is there anything they have to do is, because it's impacting, adjacent.
as long as they have the capacity.
right,
And yeah, and it's gonna be a building department
Yeah.
call as to whether it, that installation meets code for that type of development. Yeah.
But there's no trigger of the building department, if you just want to have. If you want to have the EV, and
If you wanna upgrade,
Well, if you want to use a standard outlet that already exists, you can, right?
Right.
Just run an extension cord, as
Okay.
long as you don't violate any code for running an extension cord.
And have it approved by the condo board as well, wouldn't they have input on?
No,
Well,
that's-
that?
inside your garage.
that's what I'm getting at, I think that's. The technology is running ahead a little bit on that.
right, so right now, I believe we're saying that level 1 and level 2 EV charging stations can be permitted in all zoning districts as an accessory use. And that level 1 chargings are exempt from any sort of site plan review. All level 1 and level 2 EV chargers with a residential garage of 1 and 2 family or townhomes. Just need to conform to requirements as required by the residential code. But then when we start dealing with level 3, we do require a site plan review by the planning board for level 3 chargers.
What's
That's
the,
those are the fast chargers.
Yeah,
Yeah,
those are the big ones.
That's like the ones in Golden Bridge.
so that's a level 3,
Yeah.
okay, so what's 1 and 2, is there, it's not much of a difference than what?
One is like
40
basically a
amps,
1
80
amp
amps.
outlet.
Yeah.
So, and
Regular, okay.
level 2 is like your dryer, it's a 220, 40 amps or 30 amps.
And neither one of them are very fast either. As far as charging, it takes time.
So both those are plugging in
Yeah,
overnight,
there's
that's
nothing-
what it's doing, okay.
Yeah, so that really is gonna challenge the building department or the electric folks.
Yeah, or the grid.
Right, so then the next section, again, deal with more cleaning up, the petitions and public hearings and planning board review, again, it's getting them back to New York State, town law. And then cluster developments, this, I think we dealt with as really more of, I think, with you, with the escrows, correct?
Right. Where's cluster development, there you go, yeah.
Article
11.
11.
And then the last two are your battery energy storage and solar energy system regulation. And again, the town already permits solar panels, but that's pretty much all that it said on that, and as we know, the technology it's here and there's a lot, and it's probably, and I think you're getting, is it canopies? Canopies?
Probably not this round, but they're in the future sometime and Senator Markham
Right.
has just got that legislation that he was trying to get passed, which is to allow canopies in.
Parkland.
Yeah, so
So we
it's
are.
not imminent.
Just because it's allowed though, doesn't necessarily mean that
It
it's
should.
for Lewisboro.
I just saying that, like, it's not imminent, but
Yeah.
it's a possibility.
So what we are suggesting in terms of tier 2 battery energy storage systems, and tier 3 solar energy storage systems, which are solar energy storage systems, which I mean, excuse me, solar energy systems. These are your canopies, your larger battery energy systems. We are specifically focusing those as special permits from the town board in your commercial districts. Right, so that's where you're most likely, so it prevents somebody from coming in and saying, I'm gonna take undeveloped land and turn it into like solar farm or solar array. But right now, ultimately, if at some point in time, the town board wants to change things, go for the first step of bringing
It'll be
these.
commercial.
Tier 1 would be if someone wants to put a battery system.
Yes.
Tesla wall in their house, they can do that.
Yes. Tier 1s are considered basically. Tier 1s are basically considered battery energy storage systems. Tier 1s and tier 2s, they're considered accessory uses in all zoning districts. And there's certain requirements that they would have to meet, but they are considered accessory uses. And in terms of the EV charging stations, just so that everybody is aware, the level 3 charging stations, which we were just talking about, is the larger ones, those are also permitted in your commercial districts as well as the RMF, which is your multifamily district. And then the residential districts, the larger EV charging stations are not permitted. So. That's,
So for commercial use, does that trigger a site plan?
which river segment.
Mhm.
We're talking about larger battery storage, larger solar, but it also requires special permit from the town board. So they would have to,
Site plan?
Yeah, there was a site plan amendment for those 2 charging stations. Yeah.
That's right. So next steps.
And yeah, so from a process standpoint, we really have 2 key components here, right? We have the update of the comp plan, and then you have this set of town code amendments. So and
You want me
I
to?
got the 18 here. Okay, so Christian and I sat down today. Recommendation is 1, treat them in 2 distinct phases. It just makes sense. You could try to bundle, but it's not from a process and sort of a legal protection standpoint, the comp plan is the foundation. So that should be dealt with first.
Mhm.
So what does that entail? There's one kind of minor procedural, it's not a glitch, but just a kind of a procedural step that we should probably tend to, and that is that because the board created basically a steering committee, kind of a special board in its own right to develop the comp plan. Once the comp plan is in a form that we're all comfortable with, that board needs to refer it formally to the town board.
They did that already.
Actually, they do that, yes,
Yeah, okay.
yes.
I do have a resolution.
You've got the resolution?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, no, okay.
Got me scared. I was like, what else do they have to do?
That sounds really.
No, I did, there was we wrote a resolution and there was a vote we were not at that meeting, but Katie.
We did.
Katie was, yep,
Step 1, see,
Checking.
done.
I'll check that box.
public hearing and referrals is well, 3 things. 1, secret processing,
Mhm.
public hearing, and referrals.
So we do the secret, right?
You'll do the secret, and it is purely it's purely a function of the town board to pass upon the comp plan. There aren't other agencies that have any kind of input, so
That's right.
this can be done in an uncoordinated way. You don't need to go through a lead agency. circulation and, you can just, you can kind of just move forward with an evaluation of environmental impact, the EAF. And begin to process.
We have to do it type 2 first or at the same time?
Well, it's not.
That was my question.
So you're not, so again, and I said at the outset, the distinction between initial formulation of a comp plan and an update is that if something you were creating from whole cloth, it would be type 1
Mhm.
presumptive requirement for at least a
Right.
generic environmental impact statement. You don't need to do that.
So it's a type 2.
Right, that's
No,
what-
it's
No, it's not even.
It's unlisted.
Okay,
Oh, it's
Which
in-
means that you're gonna have to review it and at the time of action, prior to the action, you're gonna have to adopt a neg deck, provided you're comfortable with, you can do so. That is probably the,
So we're doing that at the time of adoption simultaneously.
or before. Yeah, right.
so it would be before,
Neg deck is just. for
Negative
folks at
declar-
home. That's a
Negative declaration.
Declaration.
Negative
saying that-
declaration says that looking at what we're about to do, we've determined that there is no like specific or specified significant environmental impact. And there isn't in the sense that there's nothing site specific about this comp plan. It's not as if you're targeting a specific project or you're
Right.
amending the comp plan to kind of give way or open the door. So, but you're basically saying we're not going to go through the entire step by step process of looking at a draft environmental impact statement, final environmental impact statement, and finding statement.
Because
Just go-
we're
because you're comfortable.
updating it.
You're updated and you're comfortable based upon the environmental information and impact information that's provided through the EAF, that no further examination.
If we had-
required.
Eliminated our wetlands code, then.
Yeah,
Then.
right.
That'd be
it's
different.
As
something like
applied,
Right, right.
as applied trigger.
so,
Yeah,
so do we put the master plan, the draft of the master plan on for public hearing first and then secret?
No, well, you'll.
The other way.
You'll get an EAF,
Mm-hmm,
you'll get it at a meeting.
Mhm.
I think once the EAF is in hand, you're gonna do two things. One, you're gonna take the EAF. You're gonna take the comp plan, provided we're all comfortable that it's,
mm-hmm,
where it should
Environmental
be.
assessment form, right?
Right,
mm-hmm.
and you're gonna have to the one referral you're gonna have to make with that is to county planning.
Right.
Okay, so that'll go to county planning and that's a minimum 30 days.
Minimum 30 days.
Right,
Mm-hmm.
so that will go to county planning.
They decide if they're gonna make any comments and
Yeah, so-
usually they refer back for things
Yeah,
like this.
typically they'll say it's something that's a matter of.
And that should be after we've done our hearing, you said.
Well,
I don't know.
it's on the schedule.
Yeah, make the
Make the
deputy-
referral.
Make the referral and then schedule your public hearing. I would say like 45 days out.
Well, we're targeting, according to the schedule, it's May 13th. To call for the public hearing and the referral.
Okay, right.
What
Yeah.
schedule?
Hmm?
What schedule?
The one that we talked about with Katie.
Schedule that's been distributed, that's in that email.
Right, okay. that's
So
the
where does the
proposal.
EAF come
Yeah,
from?
outline, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
got it.
I mean, that's the target.
Target.
Yeah.
So,
As with everything with human beings.
and then the public hearing, June 10th was the target.
Okay,
Which I think is likely to work.
Mhm.
I guess the question is, how many public hearing sessions do you think you'll conduct?
we won't know until we get started, so we can say we want to break them down into, so many sections based on, we could find that we got through something
Right
quick.
now, we're just talking about comp plan. We're just gonna
Oh,
go
that's
with
right.
comp plan.
Not the zoning text amendment, sorry.
Yeah, right, so.
How do we, my only concern is how do we really how does the public not know that we're only doing public hearing on bond purposes?
I think we make that clear.
Yeah, the notice will be-
That they make-
Yeah,
Let's be clear.
And make the point that the comp plan really needs to be the predicate for the zoning amendments.
Right.
Because,
And we still have to take into consideration that we probably need to have another work session on the other two issues that were recommended changes to the zoning code having to do with sewer. And,
yeah, those can get kind of.
we can push them,
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So, but,
fine.
all right, so we clear comp plan and you public hearing, you,
Public hearing about the comprehensive.
Yes.
referral to the county planning, board for purposes of comment. Come in for a public hearing, conduct the public hearing, close the public hearing, and then
Vote to adopt.
you're in a position to adopt.
So we have to, so if we do the next regular meeting, we do the county referral and then start the 30 days, I guess. But we can't set up the hearing before we have the response.
You can set it up in anticipation of having a response. So the response should be, turnaround's about like 30 days, which is now, so we, yeah, great.
That's saying.
Yeah, so we did, oh, so it's 45 days from the referral to the next meeting, we can target the
Right.
So
public
the
hearing.
next meeting, it's April 8th.
Yeah.
That's the meeting you're referring to.
Yeah, next regular meeting, we can send a referral out. Right?
Yeah, so.
That way we
Yeah,
still start the 45 days, you know.
Yes, yeah.
That sets it up, like you said, the May 13th,
Yeah.
approximately, right? For
Well, it
the-
says, so March, April says either internal review of secret part 1 and 2 to occur between Valerie and John.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
So,
I haven't.
Yeah.
Valerie's done her part. So
okay, and does that need to be completed?
you need to have it in hand. At the time, you need to have it in hand when you make the referral and you set the.
Which means you would have to give it to us before the April 8th meeting.
Yeah.
Is that possible?
They didn't blanch, so I think that's a good sign.
For the comp plan, yeah, I think.
Yeah.
We'll have to speak, because right now it includes, the secret includes the comp plan and the zoning. so
Yeah, but I
just
think
pull
we
it
can just
out.
call it out, yeah. And it's a little duplicative to do secret again, but I think it's best just to get the comp plan.
Whatever.
Yeah.
So then we get the comp plan adopted, and then we begin to deal with the zoning code. Now, the zoning code piece, there are a couple of tricky things about how that gets processed. One is that you have a number of code amendments, all kind of under the umbrella of the new comp plan, we're trying to update things. But under state law, when you adopt local laws, they are technically to deal with like kind of discrete subject matters. So you've got to be careful not to just lump everything into one
Mhm.
omnibus, right? So for example, zoning is clearly something that is going to have to be, like a standalone. We're thinking, I think our take was you're probably going to be looking based on the stuff we have. The chapters we're going to, with the introduction of new chapters, and with the revisions, we're probably looking at 6. Right? 6 local laws.
About 6.
Yeah.
So you can't like say carve out the updates that are more just language and not really
Because
substantive.
it's a subject matter.
So sure,
Yeah,
okay, so you have to break it up,
Right.
even if it's substantive or not substantive,
Right.
you have to break it
So
out by
those,
subject.
so the 6 local laws that are being across multiple.
Multiple
Meetings.
areas.
Multiple town board meetings. So
Yeah,
it could be
but,
all at once.
I don't want to overcomplicate this, but so we have, let's say we have 6 local laws now. Of those, you're gonna have referral requirements on certain of those amendments, but not others. So for example, zoning and wetlands under your town code and under, well, both need to go to the planning board for referral. So you'll have to refer those to the planning board. I can tell you right now that we've already set up special meetings to begin
Right.
review,
So
so,
easy.
but you gotta check that box and
Yeah.
always say we referred it out. County planning on the zoning, you're gonna have to check that box again and build in 30 days.
Can the referral be done all at once for all 6?
For the ones that need to be done, yeah, they can, for the
Okay.
ones that need to be done, they can be done at the same time, yeah. The public hearing can be scheduled, and you could schedule 6 public hearings, but not hold them all
Well,
at the same time.
right.
Right, okay.
And I recommend that.
On the same night, you
Like,
mean?
People are gonna talk about all
Right,
different,
yeah, right.
So you just line them up back to back to back.
Yeah,
Break it
they're
down
all
like that.
scheduled for, town board meeting starting at 7:30.
So you don't have to
Yeah.
open and close each specific one.
Yeah, I mean, technically, there are
You do.
multiple,
All at the same
but yeah,
time.
yeah,
Okay.
but at least there, you can handle them.
Okay, got it.
You're not gonna come in and say, all right, from 7:30 to 8:30, we're doing this. You can hear them all at the same time, and it's the only way to do it, because as
Yep.
Valerie said, people are gonna get up and talk about.
Everything,
Yeah.
right. It gets too confusing to do it the other way. I understand. Okay,
The other piece of that, secret, and again, we view that as unlisted and. Because nothing is project specific, we'd be comfortable. Want to dictate the way we're gonna go, but that this would likely move towards an egg deck, so that the zoning amendments would not be required to run the gauntlet of full environmental impact statement process. But we need a separate, we'll take the EAF, the draft EAF that's been drafted and basically cut it into two. So you'll have one for comp plan and then one for the zoning amendments.
okay.
Yeah, and you'll need that EAF when you ship out to county planning.
Yeah.
Okay. That's just another task to get done.
But some, not all of those have to go to county, right?
Yeah, some, but not, right.
Zoning, so-
And you only need part 1 and 2 of the EAF when you do the referral, obviously.
Okay.
And both of those are done.
Yeah, both are done. Yeah, we just need them.
Okay.
The other piece of the code changes that we have to be mindful of is that there are state requirements in terms of, public hearings have to be minimum like 10 days notice. The code changes have to be distributed to the board members, in advance of the hearing in their proposed form. Should there be any quote unquote substantive changes that are made during the course of the public hearing, it could re-trigger or require continuation of the public hearing so that whatever is voted on has been embedded. That will all kind of play out. But I mean, that process of, I think provided everything kind of like fell together. We were looking at maybe like 10 to 12 weeks. Was that right? Yeah. Yeah.
For the
For the
local law.
local law.
Just because there's 6 of them,
Yeah.
the secret process of the county referral, planning board referral for some of them.
Okay.
And again, this is just primarily about making sure the procedures and, public is given the ample opportunity to give the opine on these local laws, as well as for the board to consider and review. And just-
Right, if everything goes well, we're not amending or changing anything that's gonna require us to come back and
Yeah, right.
do it over again. Okay.
Just we took, there's been so much time and effort, devoted to this that you don't want to,
You don't wanna rush it at the end.
Yeah.
There's
Well, we wanted,
liabilities.
yeah, we want to do it right and we want to do it once.
Yes.
I think I don't do it.
Okay. Got it.
All right, so we'll work on that schedule, because
Yeah.
what I had here, it had both the comp plan and the
No,
zoning.
yeah, we
combined.
looked at it and just,
Yeah.
thinking about it, it's just like, it's gonna be, one, it's gonna be a jumble in
Mhm.
trying to explain to the public what we're doing. And two, while it expands that process a little bit, it really is sequentially the way to do it, because your zoning code in particular, the foundation for that has to be a comp plan, so it's like, let's set the foundation,
Right.
Yeah, and then move on.
Got it. Okay.
the comp plan is essentially a legislative.
It's your
Findings.
guidepost. Yeah, yeah.
for-
it's-
for
yeah,
enactment.
yeah.
Okay.
You said that it was the comp plan was the foundation.
Yes.
Is that,
Yeah,
that's the word you used? right?
yeah, so you're.
Is it good?
The foundation for the
For the
zoning
Yeah.
changes.
in essence, all the zoning changes need to be in conformance with the comprehensive plan, so that's why you need to, if you wanna make zoning changes and these other changes, comp plan needs to be.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's a good point.
It's like the skeleton, it's the
Yeah, right.
framework
Yeah.
on which
Exactly.
And,
all
and
the code is built.
If you look at that table, it references the objectives of
Right.
the comp plan.
Yeah,
And Christian's point's a good one in the sense that under your current code, under the code as it was, is under just standing sort of practice and law. If an amendment is proposed to the zoning code in the future, one of the analyses that's supposed to be done is, does the amendment align with the objectives in our comp plan? Like when
Mhm.
amendments refer to the planning.
So
that's
the
what you
first
do.
one doesn't align, and then you go.
Yeah,
back.
right, but also,
Yeah.
I mean, there are some things that are being kind of held in reserve that, you know, and things are gonna come up, there are things from a zoning perspective that are gonna can't even imagine like 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now.
Yeah, things that we can't anticipate
Yeah,
today that are
yeah.
gonna come up.
But you,
Right.
but the comp plan has to be there to,
right,
and that's also why the comp plan is as important as it is, it's not. You know, it needs a degree of, you know. Flexibility and ability to, you know, to be kind of an adaptive tool, but still give you like, here are the kind of core principles that guide you.
it's like the Constitution, gives us a great framework on which to build our community.
Okay.
And I won't go to the building.
Okay. Well, this is great.
You know, can I just say one more thing?
Go ahead.
Today is Holi, which is a Hindu holiday of building community and acceptance. So it's a most appropriate thing that we've done today. So thank you. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Valerie, for the presentation. Thank you, Judd.
Thank you.
Christian, for being here.
For reading all those many pages.
Yes.
I've become
Lot of-
one with the Google Drive more than I thought possible.
And if anybody wants to read, they're on, the links are on our website, so if
Yes.
anyone in the public is interested. And certainly access the documents there.
Well, again, publicly commend the town board for its selection of the chair of your steering committee.
Oh,
Yeah, she's keeping
On
great.
our toes.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
She's
Yes.
incredibly efficient.
Very, very.
Now,
Appreciate you guys being here and walking us through this. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
All right, so the only other thing I have left is, let's see, we have approval of claims. So I'd like to motion that we approve claims.
Second,
All discussion, all in favor?
Hi.
Aye. And the next announcements, the next town board meeting is Monday, April 8th, 2024, at 7:30 PM here at the townhouse. So thank you all here in the room. And everyone on Zoom.